Thank you for joining me, Tsegaye.
Thank you, Teklai, for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's my pleasure indeed. It's been a long time. I think it was 3 years ago that we had a conversation here, or maybe two, and
Yes,
we
it's been
have.
a while.
It's been a
And
while.
I am to blame. I am the one who disappeared.
I think that's fair.
My
I think that's
apologies
fair.
in advance.
I accept the apology on behalf of our viewers, Tsegaye. We're going to talk about all the issues around Addis Ababa. So we're going to try to zero in on that issue because it strikes me as a very important point in current political discourse in relation to the so-called national dialogue underway today. And the whole thing seems to revolve. I think there is sort of consensus or agreement on the other issues they are talking about, but the issue of Addis Ababa is something that seems to set off some sort of frenzy. And you are somebody who has thought about Addis Ababa a lot, who has written about Addis Ababa a lot, and who have advocated certain positions. And I thought you would be the right person to talk about that, to outline what are the issues that people are talking about. So that's what we're going to take as much time as possible, Tsagaye, to really lay out all the issues around that. But before we start doing that, message to our viewers, if you want to support us, please do subscribe. That is the simplest way to support the channel, I suppose. So please do that. So again, Addis Ababa. Should we even call it Addis Ababa? Does the name matter? Finfin Addis Ababa. What is the name?
Well, many Oromos have no serious problem with it being called Addis Ababa, but because they don't usually use that name at home among themselves, even in political circles. The preferred name Oromos use to refer to the city is Finfinne, which is the name that was used way before the imperial conquest and colonial settlement of the 19th century. As someone who deals with constitutional issues and constitutional identity, I would have liked at the time when homogenization is legally stopped, interrupted, and multinational federalism was ushered in, I would have liked to see the coming back of the pre colonial names of towns, including the capital city. And such an experience has been seen in places like Pretoria, South Africa, where its pre-colonial name, Tswane, its African name, is part of the constitution. And Africans use that name to refer to the city among themselves, and others use Pretoria because it's already internationally known as such. And most Oromos would be more comfortable and more accommodated and more part of the polity if Finfinne is also taken as a legitimate other name of the city. But the more the mainstream or whoever considers themselves as the custodians of the Ethiopian national identity maintain, that name is illegal. That name must be stamped out of the public memory. And no, very few years ago, just immediately after Abiy Ahmed was ushered into office, there was a public demonstration where people were singing in the public square, in Revolutionary Square, in what is called the Meskel Square, saying "Bimejishim by Mejishim, Shaggar Finfinne Ihonelishim." So willy-nilly, the name Finfinne is not fit to be the name of the capital. And there were demonstrations in the same vein which said Oromo out of Finfinne, Oromo out of Addis Ababa. Nations and nationalities and peoples must be stamped out of Addis Ababa, and so on and so forth. The more that kind of rhetoric flares up, the more Oromos begin to say, well, after all, we don't even recognize the name the colonial masters gave the city. So we don't understand what Addis Ababa is. We don't even know how to say it. That's why people say Addis Ababa, the short form, because Addis Ababa is too long, and So anyway, or Oromos prefer to call it Shaggar. And hence, now the wider area, the wider Addis Ababa area, the environ now is called Shaggar City Council. The name, I have made peace with it as someone who has grown up in it, as someone who has his lineage going back to some of the villages of this huge ragtag of garrison towns. I have made peace with it. I grew up speaking only calling it as Addis Ababa, and then of course after 1991, Oromia region always referred to it legally, officially, publicly in the exchange, official papers, documents. they have always called it Finfinne, and nobody had a qualm. For example, the Oromia courts, Oromia High Courts, Oromia Supreme Court, do their cases referring to the city as Finfinne. And when that case goes on appeal to the federal courts, federal judges had no issue whatsoever to take that up, and understandably, understanding it as meaning Addis Ababa, and legitimately that's the name that Oromos want to call it, and nobody had an issues for the last 30 so years. Public service institutions, civil servants, the police, the military, all of them, whoever has communicated with the Oromia government has been communicating. So they write to Oromia government in Amharic if they are a federal official. They write it in Amharic, and when they write it, they say is their address. But when they write, when the Oromos receive it, they wouldn't take issues with why the federal official who wrote it in Amharic has called it Addis Ababa. They know that it is Finfinne. So it wasn't an issue, but it would have been a boost to the part Oromo has in Ethiopia if its capital city is also called equally Finfinne in the federal constitution. But that is not an issue for most Oromos because they will always call it Finfinne anyway, popularly, in private, in Oromia political and public life. So it's not a big deal. It's not a big issue. Of course, some nationalists deliberately may want to excise anything that is Amharic. That's up to them. But me, as a person who has grown up, who also understands what my folks say, but who also grew up in this city, and as a man who feels that in my layered multiple identity, I take that as part of what I know, what is ingrained in me, and I have no issues to call it Addis Ababa or Finfinne. And partly because the name has gone to the international level. So when you deal with Geneva or New York or Brussels, you will have to use this name because this is what is known. Like South Africa uses Pretoria when it goes abroad in international realms, but at home they call it both. So the name has no problem. There isn't much in the name.
There isn't much in a name, and indeed, what you're telling me is that the people are more nuanced than the politicians appear to be, because it's where it's in the political discourse where there appears to be an issue with the name.
Even among
But anyway,
politicians, sorry, even among politicians, the name has never been an issue because you have seen many Oromo officials, both in the federal government and in the Oromia government, they use the words Finfinne and Addis Ababa interchangeably, and it has not been so much of an issue. Again, as I said, technically, legally speaking, if Ethiopia is gracious enough to accommodate, the legitimate names, the historical names of the towns that it had once displaced, then that would be nice. It would be nice if it was technically, legally in the constitution, in the federal constitution, spoken as such. But because there is a lot to say about changing of names, for example, the names of Bishoftu, Debre Zeit, Adama, Nazareth, and some other Ambo and Waliso, all these names have been renamed now. So renaming has in its own right an issue, but it also tells you how much the decolonization of Ethiopia in the south has not taken a full swing.
well, so we're going to use both names interchangeably, as you say, Tsegaye, out of respect to both, and because we're trying to bring people together as well. So we don't want to create any wedge issues from the get-go. So when it comes to Addis Ababa, from where I am sitting, the issues that seem to arise from time to time its identity, its history, the issue of ownership, the issue of culture, the issue of its status as a capital city and what that should mean, and what the constitution says and what does it mean within the broader constitutional framework. And I thought maybe a good starting place would be for you to tell us what the constitution as it stands today says about Addis Ababa.
The federal constitution talks about the capital city of the Ethiopian government. The Ethiopian state has Addis Ababa as its capital city. Now, the term capital city is not normally used in a federal country because in federations, mostly capital cities, capital districts are negotiated intentionally, and agreement is reached at the inaugural moment, at the beginning. Because of that, once they designate one particular area as a federal capital, they won't call it a federal capital, they call it a federal district, a federal territory, or something like that. So when a technical legal reader reads the constitution and sees that Addis Ababa is the capital city of Ethiopia, he would, you know, raise his eyebrows and says, wait, didn't you just say this is a federal, especially multinational federal setup? Because you wouldn't expect the term capital city in a federation. You usually use the seat of government, or you can have different capitals, mostly in federations. You have the legal capital, Johannesburg. You have the political capital, Cape Town, where the parliament sits. You have the executive capital, where the president, the prime minister, the cabinet, and the government, the executive, sit. Those are very interesting. International law also, the international community also has the legal capital, the political capital, the commercial capital. One of the things that I think is a missed opportunity in Ethiopia is to have a thorough, sustained reflection on what to do, where to posit the federal government. It wasn't discussed. Finfinne was the inheritance from the imperial past. Whoever has gone into the palace sat there and said, well, we proceed from here. And nobody questioned that. Much to the credit of the 1960s generation of revolutionaries, whose remnant arrived in Addis in the person of Meles Zenawi and co. in 1991, they had a sense of place, a sense of where this place is, especially given the fact that they are talking about multinational federalism. They are talking about a new covenant for Ethiopia among national sovereign groups. They understood that there is something to be said about this inherited place. So they said this inherited place continues to be the capital, and this is from where we rule. But at the same time, we know that there is some special interest that we have to consider with regard to the people. So what it says is Addis Ababa will be the capital city of Ethiopia. Its population will administer itself through its own elected representatives. It will be represented through members elected to the House of People's Representative in the federal government. And considering its location in Oromia, that's what it says, Oromia has a special interest, especially in relation to environmental protection, administrative expediency, and so on and so forth, shall be respected. And nobody really disaggregated what those special interests mean. The jurisprudence has not grown. And of course, Ethiopian political discourse, particularly the Ethio-Amhara elite's discourse, forecloses any discussion on what that special interest means. First and foremost, special interest is not accorded to the people who are actually the native indigenous inhabitants of a place. Special interest, if it has to be said so, is accorded to the newcomers who don't have as much interest, as much rights as the inhabitants do. You see, this is, for example, we are migrants living in other countries. Special interests are not given to the Swedes in your case, or to the Australian-born, mainly Anglo-Saxon white Australians. Some special interests with a tag are given, of course, recognized with regard to the immigrant communities, because they are going to be citizens by naturalization. They are going to be adopted as natural citizens. That's the nature of things. So the indigenous inhabitants should be the mainstream, the normal, who enjoy all the rights, with no exception. And because of their minority status in number, for example, those who have come to reside in that area, if they are threatened by the democratic tyranny of the majority, then you must make sure that you protect those minority rights, and that is called the special regime. What does that mean? We are here in Oromia. The Oromia government is obviously, the Oromia parliament will be overly represented by the Oromo representatives, and non-Oromos will be disadvantaged. And therefore, the Oromia government should make sure that the non-Oromos' rights must be respected, despite the fact that numerically they are not as large as the mainstream society. So there is a travesty, to be honest. There is something wrong about according special interest to the inhabitants which are pushed out, and mainstream right to the settlers who now don't want to see anything whatsoever that has to do with the native inhabitants. This is the problem. This is the core problem. Where did that emerge from? Because by 1991, everyone thought the imperial project of cleansing the city from Oromos has been complete. So although they are already they are there on the fringe of the city anyway, because the names have been changed, because the places have been modernized, because they have changed, hands have been changing over it. They were the Italians, the Ethiopians again, and so on and so forth. And regimes have been coming and going, etc. So the core of the city has forgotten that this has been an Oromo territory. This has been a place inhabited by Oromos, particular families, tribal groups. And there are names, there are mountains, there are trees where Gada assemblies were conducted. Irecha was conducted. And people remember, and entire folk songs of Oromos of Shoa talk about the time when they were forced out of those areas. But in Ethiopia's political imaginary, there was no Oromo around here. I remember growing up in Addis in 1986, or was it 88, at the 100th anniversary of the centennial anniversary of the city. Empress Taitu was, of course, the hero, the heroine. And we were, as kids from elementary school, we were doing, in those days, language Spartakiad things. We were part of the show in the stadium. It's typical, a North Korean style of show we put in the stadium in the Revolutionary Square back then. And a whole month of reciting the history of the city, how it all emerged, dramatizing it by artists, all sorts of stories flowing. And in that story, there was no mention of the Oromo, none whatsoever. It's completely pure. It's like from Ntoto, Empress Taitu saw down and she saw a hot spring springing up, and she said, "What is this place? It looks beautiful." And there are these flowers that usually emerge during this season towards New Year, Ethiopian New Year, and that was the flower that Empress Taitu saw and called, "This is the new flower, Addis Ababa." All these stories are told to us. So it was a jungle, a hot spring, and she was in the mountains of Ntoto, where the church St. Mary was, and she just, Kidana Meret or St. Mary, whichever it is. And it was like between Ntoto and the actual place where today it's called Filwa, where the Gion Hotel is located. There was nothing. It was a masterless property. It was a terra nullius, totally. And nobody told us what was in between. Where did the other people go? Why was it called Finfinne? Nobody told us about it. That was intriguing to my child's mind, because as of age 6, as a person who grew up in that city, my father used to take me to the National Archives, the National Museum. But my father was a patriot who fought during the Italian War, and he has been a survivor of many of the Ethiopian wars. Even during the Derg, Abator was the name, who had to, again, reconscripted after he retired to be part of the war effort. So my father used to take me to places that he remembers. The martyrs statue in Sidiskilo, the Minilik, the Line of Judah statue in Legahar. At age 6, you learn about these things. The great paintings in the National Archive, Beherawi Wemezekir, by the great Afwerk Tekle. For the first time, I saw a painting on the roof and on the walls of a whole building there. And my fascination it came back to me only when I went to Italy, into the University of Trento, where you were as a visiting professor. Almost every building has that. And I then made the connection that Afwerk Tekle was educated in Roma, in Barcelona. And therefore, that's where this kind of drawing came from. Okay, this kind of tradition. Although there is the Ethiopian touch, of course, But this whole thing was shown to me when I was very young. And it's to a very impressionable young mind. This is huge, So while he shows me those things, he tells me the story of the indigenous people, our relatives who were removed from those places. How they were uprooted and they left for Sidamo, for Bale, for Arsi, Bokoji, or for Harar, in the southeast. So he tells me about this. And he tells me the folk songs. He recites the poems. It was in this year, during this time, that this song was sung. And so for me, who has absorbed this, both on archival basis, because my father, as I said, as a survivor of the Second World War, he has all sorts of documents, books, writings, medals, in the home. He's part, all the paraphernalia of the empire was in our home. So as he teaches you, he also teaches you your heritage. So in the public narration of the history, all this is not there. And I thought it's just my father's great storytelling capability that furnished all these details in between, but it's not real history. So that's how we grow up. Why did I raise all this now? I think I went a little off track. So it's almost seen as a terra nullius, as a land without a people that was occupied and that was cultivated, developed, modernized, and civilized the surrounding population. Civilized. Who would they civilize? The Aramani, the barbaric, the faithless, and the Galla. And I'm not making this up. I can read you a writing by a former Ethiopian foreign minister who writes this in 1931. In a great book, he writes about the history of Ethiopia from the time of the Queen of Sheba to the time of Haile Selassie, basically, in which time he was a foreign minister. He writes a book entitled Adwadil. Sorry, it was up to the time of the victory of Adwa. And this was written in Ethiopian calendar 1928, which is around 1936-37. So in this book, he says on page 87 about, he writes extensively about the details of how Finfinne was occupied and how the name was changed. So he says this, ይህም ዛሬ አዲስ አበባ ተብሎ የኢትዮጵያ ዋና ከተማ የሆነው እዚያ ዘመን ፊንፊኔ ይባል ነበር። ንጉሥ ሳህለ ሥላሴ አገሩን ሲያቀኑ in the business of civilizing So it's strange that this Amhara aristocrat from the court uses the Oromo word to talk about submission and being proper. Sera, the Oromo word proper, legal, law, literally. Anyway, he says, meaning there was resistance ongoing. Although the Oromo had submitted and they had controlled it, but the Oromo in this environs continued to resist and to rebel. And as a consequence of that, the king had to go out to pacify the area at least 3 times a year. So all that resistance, all that fighting tells you that this is a place with a history. This is a place with a people. This is a place with a people who had agency, who were trying to ensure that they are here and they are not living present. And these are the people that Ethiopia wanted to make absent. And it continues to say, በኋላ ግን የአብቹና የገላን ጋሎች, these are 2 interesting tribes of the Oromo of the area. የአብቹና የገላን ጋሎች, and never mind the pejorative, the denigration, the name that denigrates the Oromo, they call it Galla.
That was the language they used then.
Yes, አቶ መረጭ ሰጡት። ከዚህም በኋላ በአብቹ ጉልበት ገላንን፣ አድአን፣ ወበሪን፣ ጅሩን፣ ዋዩን፣ ሰላሌን አድክመው ገባር አደረጉት። So what he's actually saying was that what we concocted was a fight between 2 tribes who were inhabitants of the area, and the 2 tribes are called Abichu and Galan, and we approached one and pitted him against the other, and over 70 years, over a time of a duration of 7 years, we finally supported the Abichu Galan and the Abichu tribe, and it finally prevailed over the Galan. And when they are all weakened, we came in and ከዚህም በኋላ በአብቹ ጉላንን ያሳስበናል. What he's basically saying is that the principle of divide and conquer, divide and rule, which was made famous in the 19th century by Lord Frederick Lugard of Britain, was long before this time used in Ethiopia by Haile Selassie, by our forefathers. And indeed, their wisdom, when you look at their wisdom today, and when you admire the divide and rule policy that the European colonialists have used, we thought this was an ingenious creation of the new times. But so it happens that King Solomon of the biblical times had said that there is nothing new under the sun. What has been done before is being done again. Now that's the narration. And that's not an Oromo nationalist. That is a court official, the foreign minister of Haile Selassie. Mind you, this person actually was on exile with the emperor in the UK, and he died in 1936 in the UK, and he was buried in the UK. And of course, the emperor did not want to have a foreign ministry handed over to any particular minister. He was the foreign minister himself. So the guy was called the director of the foreign office. So he's basically next to him. And it's only after the days of Rui Wilde Selassie that the other famous foreign minister, Prime Minister Tsegaye Ararssa, later came up, and he was for a long time the guy who made Churchill during the war, the guy who actually was feared to have to displace Haile Selassie because he had been very prominent. Tsegaye Ararssa Wilde Giorgis was also part of this cohort. So this is their story. This is obvious. Now there is a revisionist narrative that is thrown around, including just today, just an hour before I came to you, there was a statement issued by Amhara Fano organization, and where they say, all this is rubbish. This country is our country, way before it was established as a capital city in 1886. And they talk about all sorts of strange stories about how this was an Amhara territory. It has never been an Oromo territory, and so on and so on. It was basically a declaration of war now. And it's as if the Oromos are concocting something out of nowhere and forcing it upon the city, and so on. So what the constitution actually says is that the capital city is Addis Ababa. The population in the city shall have a self-government, the right to govern themselves through their elected representatives. The residents shall have representation in the National Federal Parliament, House of People's Representatives, and the special interests of Oromos shall be protected. What is the content of those special interests? Nobody could talk about. When during the resistance against the master plan in the Oromo protest, 2014 to 2018, we raised the issue of the special interest, because the master plan was a plan that actually makes the special interest irrelevant. It was a process of undoing whatever its content is, the special interest in the Constitution. And it was making it irrelevant. It was making it superfluous. And when we look, we have already a grievance because the content of that special interest is not A, articulated, B, it's not protected. And now there is this expanding city which is uprooting the Oromos and trying to change the demography of the area altogether, and without A, any consultation with the local population, B, any compensation or a replacement house or land to Tib. And all this was being done in the name of development. This was a usual routine resistance to a development project anywhere in the world. I have worked in the UNDP. I know we deal with this challenge everywhere you try development. Consultation of the local population, finding compensation, giving them a replacement, and establish a basic social services, and then continue with your development program. And this was a modest question that was being asked. And when we raised this issue, and finally when Haile Mariam's government buckled, and when they said we have to change, and we do accept the questions, the demands raised by the Oromo protest, we will respect the special interest, the entire Ethiopian media establishment came out in droves and outraged and said, this is apartheid, a special interest for Oromos. How is this possible? Etc. And I was part of the storm during that time. And I have written extensively on A, why we resist the master plan, B, what is the special interest, C, what is the demand of the Oromo in the city, how do we identify a federal capital city. All these questions have been written about, spoken about ad infinitum. It simply exhausted us. But there was no ear to listen when it comes from the Oromo. So it went on. And the change came. Abiy Ahmed assumed office. The Oromo protesters were hoping that at least in the minimum, what is in the constitution would be implemented. And Abiy reset the entire thing, and he started talking about the return to the glory of the olden days. The restorationist politics started. Restorationist. And he wants to undo whatever recognition was granted to the nations and nationalities and peoples, at least to pacify the empire and to ensure the continuity of the Ethiopian state. That was the whole intention. 1991 dispensation was an attempt to ensure the continuity of state by giving recognition to the different groups that constitute Ethiopia. And that attempt was seen by the major mainstream Ethiopianist political class as a fabrication of ethnic fragmentation. It's a fabrication of a divisive politics, as if they generated it. TPLF was blamed, and a huge violence was meted out against them in the form of genocide in the last few years, because they were supposed to be punished for the sin they created in 1991, which is recognition of the ethnic groups. And so today I am routinely insulted today for, when I insist on the constitution, when I insist that this attempt by the National Dialogue Commission to revise the constitution and restore the empire in its pristine form, in its non-ethnic form, that's basically what it is about. When I insist on the constitution, they keep saying, we insist on the constitution that Wayani wrote for you, and you take it seriously now, you better watch. We will do what we have done to Wayani. They have the audacity to say this. We will do genocide. You see, because genocide was allowed to get away with it. I mean, genociders were allowed to get away with it without any accountability. Now they brandish that history and threaten other people with it. Abiy has been doing this several times. Tsegaye Ararssa, that's what they keep saying. And for me, that is like, this is another law. So what does the Constitution say? It recognizes the special interest. Why did it do so? Because the people who negotiated the Constitution had a sense of place. They had a sense of history, they had a sense of place, and a sense of people in the place. And so, if you recognize the particular groups that constitute Ethiopia as sovereign, as self-governing, as endowed with the right to self-determination, then you need to respect the place they stand in. And that place, Finfinne, was a place that the Oromos used to live, and it is still in Oromia. Now, one thing I want to stress, Finfinne is an Oromo city because it is a geographical fact, because it is a historical fact, as I just recounted one of the mainstream historians. History is written by mainstream Ethiopianists. It is a historical fact. It's a constitutional legal fact. The Constitution, many people say the Constitution doesn't say that it is an Oromo city. Well, it says, owing to its location in Oromia. That's where the special interest comes from. What does that mean? But some people say, but it doesn't say it is the capital city of the federal, the Oromia state. Well, it is not up to the federal constitution to talk about the Oromia state, The capital city of Oromia is to be discussed and legitimately in the Oromia constitution. And in the Oromia constitution, Finfinne is the capital city of Oromia. So the legal position is very clear. So it is a geographic fact, it's a historical fact, it's a constitutional legal fact, it is an experiential fact. You walk 5 kilometers away from the center, from downtown, you meet people, you meet places that have Oromo names. You have people who come to the marketplaces carrying all sorts of things to sell and serve the city. And you just can't, it's like you look any side, any direction, Kaliti, Sakaki, and these are all Oromo cities. And within the city, of course, they are stamped out. And the fact that you don't see, in 1900, it was said, over 80% were Oromo. In 1900, estimated to be Oromo. In 2000, only 19% are Oromo. In 1997, I think in 2005, only 19% are Oromo. And people say, look at the demography. This is not an Oromo territory. Excuse me? In Australia, the Aboriginal peoples are only 300,000 to 600,000 now. Does that make this a British, land? No, we killed them. And thankfully, Australian mainstream political class recognizes that we did kill them, that we are here on their land. And they acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, past, present, and emerging. And that is how, and they have a sorry day. They do apologies. Kevin Rudd apologized in 2008 officially. And after that, they tried to work on referendum to get a recognition, a constitutional recognition for the indigenous peoples in this country. I participated in the referendum, both as an observer, and the first time I actually voted in my entire life is for that referendum, and I am blessed for that opportunity. I remember how, when the mainstream society actually decided against recognition, the young white folks who were with us, who have been campaigning, completely smashed, and they cried on the stairs, on the runways, everywhere. They just couldn't believe that Australia shamed them. At this age, the Gen Zs said, at this age, we thought it was time. How come? It wasn't the indigenous people. I see all around me the white folks who were completely crushed. And they said, maybe we didn't do right in the campaign. Something wasn't right. And what was that recognition about? For a voice. What is the voice? The Uluru Statement, etc. You can read about it. The voice is to have a representative in the states and federal parliament, indigenous peoples, who, in spite of their numbers, will be elected and have a representative in the parliament who has only an advisory role to the parliament, who only talks about the needs, interests, rights, and demands and concerns of the indigenous people. They have voice, not vote, mind you, because democracy is run through votes. But at least hearing their concerns is an important thing. So that was all they wanted. And even that wasn't recognized in this last referendum. But it was heavily contested. And it's still around here. It was contested just like Brexit is being contested in the United Kingdom. It's still here. So when we thought about the special interest, and I was asked to articulate the special interest, and I did quite an extensive writing on that in 2018, 2017. And one of the things I actually called for was a consideration of some specific number of representatives from Oromia in the city council. They don't have any voting power, but they will have a voice. They will just hear what is being decided and air the concerns of Oromos and Oromia. And that was a minimal request. And it was called apartheid. It's a differentiated treatment of rights of citizens. And that was that. And it remained a draft. It remained an idea, and it was thrown away. Abiy came, restoration began. The institutional manifestation of that restorationist practice is this National Dialogue Commission, which basically wants to undo the constitution and take us back to the glory of the olden days.
Well, thank you for the historical detour and those passages from the Emperor's Foreign Minister, Tsegaye. That was enlightening. This whole notion of nobody's land, the terra nullius thing, is a recurring theme in the histories of many countries. You mentioned in Australia in relation to the Aboriginals, and you hear that it's framed slightly differently, but in Israel, they say it was an empty land waiting for us. We turned up and we turned it into this oasis, and that's how the story generally goes. Even in the US, the indigenous people are generally brushed aside, and they say this was an empty land. It was a credit it was a credit to European ingenuity that we even discovered it, and if anything, we deserve credit for discovering the place and turning it into what it has become. So it's a common theme everywhere. It's not just in Addis Ababa. But I suppose the more compelling counter argument to what you said would be, yes, Oromos used to live there and they were cleansed out of Addis Ababa and they were discriminated against, and all sorts of things that you went through happened to them. But by historical contingency, Addis Ababa has come to be populated by people from various areas of the country. And now that is a fact that we should recognize, and we shouldn't be making special provisions for any people. We should just accept that Addis Ababa belongs to the people who live there. We might be unhappy about how this state of affairs has materialized, but it is that the reality, and we should accept that. I think that is the more kind of compelling counter-argument to what you said. So what do you say to that?
Well, belonging is a very interesting term. It belongs to the people who live. What does it mean that the city belongs to the people who live? And what does it mean in that particular context? People say Finfinne belongs to all the nations and nationalities of Ethiopia. Okay, I have no problem with that. And Finfinne also belongs to Oromos. No, the one group that is not wanted to say to say I have a stake is only the Oromo. Why? Because they know the consequence. But the legitimate owner, once he gets into the dynamics of owning or having the city to belong to him, then we will be a second-rate citizens in those areas. But that was, I think, a scaremongering media show for a very long time that created that attitude. No serious Oromo has ever said that other people don't have a right in Finfinne, that the residents don't have the right to administer their life in that city. No Oromo has said not a fraction of their rights. I think a fraction of the rights of the people who reside there should be diminished, undermined, neglected in any form or shape. No one. I have never heard anyone say that. And I, as someone who lived in the city, who knows the people, who still considers that's my natural habitat. A decade after I left Ethiopia, the only place I call home is still that city. As that kind of person, I will never say that the people who live there, A, must leave, be displaced, or their rights to be undermined, diminished, or neglected. We have never said that. What is it that the Oromo demands there? Recognition. The simple fact of recognition, like Australia is the land of the Aboriginal peoples before settlement. Finfinne is the land of the Oromo people before settlement. Now, the demographic fact speaks otherwise. We don't like the story, how it came to be what it came to be. But once you give us that recognition, that you understand our presence, and you make some token gestures to ensure that their presence is not stamped out, then all else is politics. All else is about administration. And that is, of course, always decided democratically by the majority of the population. But the posturing against Oromo, unless Oromo is stamped out of this, in all its forms, culturally, politically, and even as a member of the Finfinne community, just a few months ago, I think a few weeks ago, there was a member of, when the election was about to start in Ethiopia, there was a member of the OLF who was born and bred in Finfinne, who was having interview with Semena Bifers, a journalist of one of the mainstream medias in Ethiopia, Semena Bifers, and he was sitting with him, and he said, as the guy introduced himself, yeah, I am so and so and so, I'm born and bred in Finfinne, and he said, so you are a member of the OLF? And the guy said, yeah. Is there any member of OLF in Finfinne? Are there any OLF people, the Oromo Liberation Front's people, who right. So, in a major TV show on the eve of the election, a political leader from the OLF was being interviewed by Semena Bifers, a famous journalist, kind of hard to talk journalist, who was interrogating this OLF politician, Oromo Liberation Front politician, and he was telling him about the fact that the guy was born and bred in Finfinne, and he said, "What? This is outlandish. Is there any Oromo member of OLF who has ever been from Finfinne?" The political leader who was being interviewed just smiled, and he said he kept on talking about what he wants to talk about as a normal politician. So what I'm trying to say to you is that Ethiopia does not even want to be reminded that there are Oromos in this city. When they speak about the city belongs.
Oh, I muted myself. That was my mistake. Yeah, but you were talking about an interview that an OLF official had with a mainstream Ethiopian journalist in Addis Ababa, and
Yeah.
you were describing the conversation. So continue from that.
Yes. What that was symptomatic of is the fact that people cannot even think of an Oromo presence within the city. When they say the city belongs to other peoples, I mean, all nations and nationalities, not, or when they say the city belongs to the residents, they don't think that part of that constituency is Oromos. They can only imagine the city without Oromos. And that, I think, is unfair. And the hatred for the name, the hatred for the language, the hatred for the people is all coming together to express itself in the end as a resistance to any claim Oromos have over the city. But yes, all the residents have the right, individual as well as collective. All the residents have the right to govern themselves by their elected representatives. But Oromos want recognition of the fact, the historic fact, that this land belongs to them. And because it does, some cultural, linguistic symbols that say so, that it belongs to them, could be good. Acknowledgement, for example, of the fact that we are here on the land of the Abichu and Galan people, okay? And that's it. And probably because this is not a city that is negotiated to be a federal capital by the contribution of all the states as such. If we want to dedicate it as a federal city, then we need to make a conscious discussion about it and what benefits Oromos get, what history they want to inscribe onto the DNA of the city, or else we have to renegotiate another city. And the best way, from what I see now, if you want to avoid a bloodbath that is being declared from all corners about who owns the city, I think the best way to do it is to begin to imagine another city, a federal district, negotiate a federal district elsewhere, or even within Oromia. And then everybody's contribution has to be known. The territorial limit of that federal district has to be known. And this is not new. Abuja was created in this way. Canberra was created in this way. Ottawa was created in this way. Different cities, capital cities of federations are created in this way. And in my view, I have been on record saying this several times, Oromos, as part of their contribution to the federal government, can offer a plot of land that is closer to the center, closer to the amenities, the development, the structures, to Finfinne, for free. And everybody else should contribute to build its federal city. And for the leadership, this will be the ultimate act and the inaugural and the last, the first ever act of nation building. Because this country never had an agreed upon shared asset, not even the dam, for example. It was almost, someone was rejecting it as a Wayani tool for exploiting the population, or the politica fujotano. It was meant for political profiteering. This was Abiy Ahmed who said it a few years ago. It was very contested, as you remember. It was even in the diaspora.
And it's and there was this refrain that it's a white elephant project.
So what I mean is, this country has never had an agreed upon national asset. If the leadership want to have a legacy, any of the leadership that emerges or current, if they really want a legacy and leave us a history of nation building, then let them at least try to imagine a new federal district, federal capital territory, and negotiate that. And a body like this dialogue commission, which is illegal, unconstitutional in my view, a body like this kind of institution should actually begin to think about where and how to construct a new federal capital with the contribution of everybody, which is neutral to everyone. Nobody will have a special claim except the federal government, whose population will administer themselves, and it will be totally. And this and all the rest will continue to live on like always. Look, Oromos will be happy if the status quo continues. That's as simple as that. We had paid dearly for it, at least in terms of 7,000 lives and 1.8 million displacements, because we went into the Oromo protest to protest the master plan. And yet, what stands now is much better than what this dialogue commission is proposing. So even if things stand like they are, and then respect human rights, respect democratic rights of people, don't discriminate against anyone, including the Oromo. And we are the ones who have been on the receiving end of discrimination. You can just listen to the plethora of comic drama and artistic slurs and all sorts of things. We have been on the receiving end of the insults and the slurs and the stereotypes and all that. So you talk about non-discrimination and equality, then treat all citizens equally and don't do anything. Just keep working, keep going with what you have. So what is bringing this back? People are trying to cleanse the Oromo, to continue the project of ethnic cleansing, the project of dispossession and displacement, the imperial project of the 19th century, now in the times of Abiy Ahmed. And they have a green light from him. It's part of the return to the glory of the olden days. It's part of satisfying the imperial nostalgia, this constant longing for a return to a lost past, which has been aestheticized culturally through songs of Teddy Afro or reggae raga in different forms for ages, through souvenirs. You go to Finfinne's sovereign shops. That's what you see. The imperial icons and all these things are aestheticized, politically depoliticized, and made plausible now artistically, so that all the political genocide and so on that went along with them, with those icons, is forgotten. And all that was an expression of longing. And that was nothing but imperial nostalgia. And Abiy Ahmed is riding on that imperial nostalgia and wants to satisfy that imperial nostalgia, which has always been already cropping up through artistic, cultural aestheticization of what was a politics of genocide, dispossession, and displacement. And all the jingoism that goes along with it is what is irking the Oromo. And the Oromo now say, wait, even this is not acceptable to you? You want to send us to Madagascar? This, by the way, this idea of the Oromo does not have a land at all in this country, does not have a share in this country.
That the Oromos came from Madagascar. They originated from Madagascar.
These kind of statements have been spoken by a former parliamentarian, and nobody asked him to account for what he's saying. Someone who is a member of the Addis Ababa City Council, who actually came from Raya, who has not been born, who didn't know, he came only for higher education purposes to the city, who said recently that if Afan Oromo is recognized as a working language in Finfinne, he will kill himself. And this is a member of city council. A sitting member of city council, nobody issued a censure, nobody asked him a question. He actually wrote a book, he speaks everywhere, and day in, day out, he speaks against Oromos. We can name people. The social media hate speech is just you can't talk about it and finish anytime. It has become legal, and people feel justified in doing it, because Abiy Ahmed's regime is a genocidal regime anyway. Oromos hate it because it is on us that a genocidal war was declared first. In parliament, Abiy's stooge sits and says, in order to eliminate the fish, drain the pond, and so hit the Oromo people indiscriminately. This is Fikadu Tesema, a member of the Oromia Chafe, the Oromia House of Representatives. The blueprint for the Tigrayan genocide was taken from there, and with some advice by Isaias, who says the TPLF goes to the country, relies on the farmers, hit the farmers hard. That's how you drain them, So that's exactly what they did. And yet, the Oromos feel victimized by this regime, and the Amharas now feel victimized by this regime, although they were the first henchmen who jovially participated in the Tigrayan genocide, wanted to participate, to continue the Oromo genocide, because they said, once we deal with the TPLF junta, then the problem of the Madagascaris, it's nothing. It's a walk in the park. That was said publicly, openly. That genocidal rhetoric hasn't been taken hasn't never been questioned, has never been put to trial, and therefore people feel justified, valorized to say anything around. And now, because this government has blood in its hands, it's easy to bash them. But when they do, they also do it by referring to it as the Oromo government, the Oromuma government. And so he is the quintessential. Now, this is a regime that actually started a genocidal war on Oromos first. This is a regime that had fallen out of favor with the Amhara political elite because Abiy Ahmed didn't finish the genocidal project in Tigray and in Oromia. And yet, this is a regime that is also being bashed because he is the champion of Oromo. Now, if Abiy Ahmed is really the ultimate enemy, then what would they make of the opposition? What would they make of me? This is the situation we are in. This is the thing that actually makes a lot of noise around Finfinne. To be honest, there is no issue whatsoever. Even if it goes on the way it is, people have tolerated it for long, and people are not protesting or demonstrating or demanding the same questions they were asking 6 years ago. I'm not saying it is right, but it is not that politically sensitive now. They have despaired. I'm not saying it is right. They should stand up for their rights because it's a legitimate claim. It's a legal claim. But people were not even asking that. Not at all. It is the other side which pushed and pushed and pushed the Oromo and established an institution that wants to go back to the olden days, to revamp any semblance of recognition extended to the Oromo, and provoked the Oromo people to come back into the debate. And that's how we are in here. And to be honest, it's very exhausting. The conversation is growing murkier and murkier. It's not gaining any traction. And it's not even useful because it is inconsequential in the end, because Ethiopia is not ready psychologically, politically, to renegotiate a federal capital city. And it reminds me of the kind of sentiment that was around in the build-up towards the Tigrayan war. Famous academics come out and say, well, Kaiti Zemenu Mefarejano, an entry point to eliminate TPLF. And they really harped on it. And I was wondering, why is they don't have any political issue? Why is everything gravitating to a small plot of land whose situation can be solved easily through the constitutional means? Why don't they have it? Anyone who has never been into politics suddenly became, considered the Wulqait issue as a rallying point. You see where it is heading. It is that kind of fever that is catching the Ethio-Amhara elite now, the Ethiopian political class now. And it betrays some inkling towards a genocidal move that is being cooked around here. The problem now is they want to do it on the regime as well as the people. And I don't mind if they destroy the regime, but I don't see why they should declare another genocidal war in Ethiopia again. But it's a dress rehearsal for a genocide. And to be honest, it's a fruitless conversation that we are having on this thing. It's absolutely unnecessary. No one has made it a political issue until the Dialogue Commission came up with this issue. I don't know why OPDO is also doing it. I don't think they stand to gain anything by changing the capital city or making it under Oromia or creating a different autonomous city government or making it completely under the federal government. I don't think there is anything politically to be gained from that. I don't even know why, unless they just wanted to stamp out anything in the constitution that kind of makes a gesture towards recognition of the other peoples of Ethiopia. Sorry, again.
No problem, no problem. It's all illuminating. Getachew Reda's famous last words were that Abiy has perfected genocide on art form, and no truer words have been said. But sadly, he has folded into Abiy's arms now. Returning to the issue of the constitution, because that strikes me as the most important kind of starting point. What would you say were the things that the constitution got right in relation to Addis Ababa, and what would you say should the things that needed improvement? Now, forget the national dialogue and what Abiy is trying to achieve. Maybe we'll come to that a bit later. But what are the things that, if you read the constitution today in relation to Addis Ababa, you would say, these are right, this couldn't be improved upon, and this is the aspect that should be improved upon, and this is how it should be improved?
I don't think the constitution got the issue of Addis Ababa right. I don't think the constitution got the issue of capital city right. I understand that there is a gesture, an awareness of a sense of place and a sense of people who lived in the place, much to the credit of the progressive generation of the 1960s, whose remnants were embodied in TPLF and OLF. But nothing else has been done about it. First, they should have interrogated its imperial heritage, that it is an inheritance from a very violent, dispossessive past. They didn't. Second, they should have decolonized it, and they didn't, meaning they should have renamed it. They should have recognized its Oromo identity, historical, geographical, factual. And they didn't. It was a passing, it's like a pointing to the geography when they say, considering the fact that it is located in the heartland of Oromia. That's all it says. I don't think that was enough. It could have saved us quite a lot of troubles today. And then taking that, acknowledged a special interest clause. They included a special interest clause, which is a clause that is without a content as yet. And it has been there during the transitional times between 1991 and 1994 in the charter, in that Charter also, and in the Proclamation number 7, 1992, which is a proclamation issued to give recognition to the regional self-government powers. And in those proclamations also, it was stated in the constitution that there will be Oromia's special interest. The only thing that's different is probably the fact that in the transitional times, Oromia's political interest, in addition to administrative, natural use of, etc., political interest shall be recognized. That's what it says, but it was nonetheless, again, a clause without a content. It has never been articulated, and it was never given a content. Not much is done, except showing a sense of awareness of the place. What is done substantially is the fact that the Constitution, first and foremost, recognizes the right of nations and nationalities and peoples to self-determination, that it recognizes sovereignty of the constituent units, that inherent sovereignty resides in the constituent units on the constituting peoples, not in the Ethiopia. That comes before the nations and nationalities. It is only a derivative sovereignty that the federal government has, that Ethiopia therefore has. And this is one of the things that the political opposition, which were opposing TPLF and still opposing Abiy, opposing them for, meaning Ethiopia's sovereignty shouldn't be derivative. It is the original sovereignty, and the sovereignty of the constituent units, the nations and nationalities and peoples, is only a fabrication of TPLF. That's how it is projected. And I think that's wrong. It is not. And these people have agency. And one of the things the Constitution got is, theoretically, the Constitution recognized and reaffirmed the collective agency of the ethnic groups. That's phenomenal. That's number one. Secondly, it is them that constituted Ethiopia. It's not that Ethiopia gave them some rights. It's not devolutionary. It was more like a coming together. Because if you read the Constitution, it says, we, the nations and nationalities and peoples of Ethiopia, having exercised our right to self-determination and wanting to build a democratic, human rights sensitive political order.
So مدمر then.
Seeking the creation of one political community, one economic community, trying to promote a lasting peace among the peoples of Ethiopia. So what they say is, this is basically what they say. It's not Meddemer, to be honest. This is recognizing the constitutive units.
That was tongue in cheek.
Yeah, I know. So trying to constitute Ethiopia. So Ethiopia's sovereignty is derivative. It's derived from the original sovereign bodies. So the greatest and the most revolutionary thing that the Constitution has done is recognition of the sovereignty of nations and nationalities, the recognition of the fact that they predate the Ethiopian polity. They are creating the sovereignty of the Ethiopian polity. Why? Instrumentally. To make a lasting peace, okay? And if we succeed, build one political community, one economic community that is based on the values of democracy, human rights, equality, gender, religious, and ethnic. And yeah, this is what we want to do. And we did it, it says. And it is only theoretical, mind you. If there is any constitution that succeeded only in promising, but not delivering, okay? Only in promising, in the entire world now, I did comparative constitutional law. It only succeeded, only by promising, theoretically, because the nations and nationalities and peoples to whom sovereignty is ascribed have never exercised it, because there was never a fair, free, democratic election in that country. Therefore, there was never a referendum to say we are in or out of Ethiopia, to say that we have this amount of sovereignty we give over to the federal government, or this we will preserve. They never said that. It was a top-down thing. A very progressive generation of politicians came together, and they realized that there is an inherent contradiction between these constituent units. The only way to survive this contradiction is to recognize it. So it is an instrument of pacification. And it's no accident that it says to build a lasting peace. And the first political institution they created, remember, is Peace and Stability Committee in the transitional times. So peace was the thing. It is a pacification tool. And recognition is for pacification. But while doing so, theoretically, it recognized the collective agency that the constitutive units have. And the pain, the agony now in Ethiopia, the anguish over politics is the fact that the nations are not willing to relinquish that. Abiy Ahmed is trying to wrest it. And this Constitutional Dialogue Commission, the National Dialogue Commission, is trying to wrest that away from them, and they are insisting on it. Why? Because the promise was there, and they are happy with the promise. They have lots of grumblings about the fact that it is under-delivered, because they've got all sorts of questions. One wants to be a special administrative, one wants a special administrative zone or Warada district. Another wants to be a state in its own right. Another wants to have a referendum and decide on whether they want to stay with Ethiopia or not. For example, Oromia, Somali, Tsegaye recently, and so on and so forth. There are lots of claims. None of them were realized. None of them were given the handle to take a step closer to realizing it. But they believe the promise. At least the door of this prison house of nations is open and nobody should close it down. And this National Dialogue Commission is trying to close it down. Abiy Ahmed's politics of restoration is trying to close the prison house down. And people are saying, no, keep the gate open. So what did the Constitution get right? It recognized these peoples. It recognized their sovereignty. It recognized their collective agency, the potential, the conditions of possibility for realizing self-determination. It recognized, above all, and delivered to a certain extent, cultural rights, the right to identity, the right to culture, the right to language, the right to history, to write, develop, and promote one's history, the right to one's own story, the right to one's own narration, not the grand narrative of Ethiopian history that is coming to them from Kebra which sees most of these peoples as the heathen, the Gentiles, the Aramani, the barbarians, waiting to be proselytized, waiting to be Christianized and become part of the covenant of God's people. So one of the things that it recognized and to a certain extent delivered is the right to one's own story. And hence the contestation over Ethiopian state history. And every time you cite some document, they say this is a fabrication of the TPLF, this is the last 27 years, and they keep revising it to actually make the empire far-reaching than it was actually there before. And even that was bad, but no, that's not enough. They wanted to make it worse. They want to make it worse. So that is what the Constitution got right. So the preamble is right. The naming, Article 1, is right. There are issues about the flag, the emblem, anthem, etc. That can be discussed, but I believe most of it is almost unimprovable because it's beautiful in it's elegant in its simplicity. For example, the emblem, equality of nations and nationalities, equality of religions, the star and the race. Simple. The national anthem, created by a Yared music school professor, the national anthem is amazing. It's a wonderful song, both the lyrics and the song. I don't think they would improve upon it. I don't think anyone would have any qualms with that. I'm now talking like an Ethiopianist. I don't care about it when I retreat back to my Oromo identity, because that's an imperial garbage anyway. But I don't think Ethiopians, as someone who has been teaching Ethiopian constitutional law very sentimentally, and as someone whose intellectual project was constitutional redemption, the hope of constitutional redemption of Ethiopia, I still feel like the anthem, the emblem, these things are okay. And the contestation over the flag is, most of it, whether we want to keep the emblem, or not. And people have gone past the tricolor. They have issues with it, but they don't care. Ethiopia wants to have it, that's fine. We have our own national flags in our regions, that's fine. But make sure that we are present, at least our equality is recognized through that star and race and so on. And somebody doesn't want it, that's fine too. They can have their own flag in their region, okay? That's not a problem. But for Ethiopia, make sure somehow that this diversity is recognized somehow. We have issues with the triple color, the tricolor, because there is a way of describing it as exclusively some groups' property. Like it's a sign of a Noahic covenant, that this country is a covenantal country. It is the second Jerusalem. It is the second holy city, now the first, because Israel has rejected the Messiah, and we did accept him. We are the country of the Bible. We are the country of the Ark of the Covenant. We are the country of the original cross of Christ, and therefore, so there is a lot that goes into that flag that most of these other people will have issues with. But as long as their presence is acknowledged in some form or shape, it's fine, you can keep it there. And partly because of the reggae, rock culture, Bob Marley, and so on and so forth. Internationally, it is a color that everybody would recognize you as. And it is a color that has traveled a lot into the newly independent African nations everywhere. So nobody can, takes issues with that. Although whenever I meet with Jamaicans or people who love this tricolor, I have some lectures to give, and they'll say, "Whoa, whoa, we didn't know that." Yeah, there are some nuances that you haven't really, complexities that you haven't understood. So that's the flag. And the ID matters, I call them in the Constitution. Name, flag, anthem, emblem, language, working language. What it got right is that we have a working language, not a national language. Abiy Ahmed's dream is to have a national language. And the entire Ethio-Amhara elite, the nostalgic folks, the ones that promote politics of nostalgia, dreaming about the lost glory, those people want a national language. I don't think it's possible to have a national language in a multilingual, multinational country. So the Constitution got it right when it says it. Amharic is a working language. And by the way, this is not the first time. During the Derg regime also, when they tried to do a constitutional revision, they also said the working language of Ethiopia is Amharic. That was great. Recognition of national languages to be practiced in public, in government, in the regions, in the localities, that's also something that they got right. What they didn't get right, and probably we need to tweak a bit, maybe very quick. So quickly, name, the ID matters in constitutional law, the name, the nomenclature of the country, the language, the flag, the anthem, the emblem. These things, I think, more or less are dealt with properly, more or less. Again, some thing with regard to language is maybe in a multinational country, you might want to have more working languages than one. And as the demands later showed, the working languages must be diversified, in my view, because all nations are sovereign and all are equal in that country. All of the languages should have been the country's working languages, but practicality should be determined on details and of funding, the level of accommodating technological and modern items in the languages, and so on and so forth. But all the languages, like South Africa was blessed with a constitution that recognized all the 11 languages, and translations are offered. In the European Union, the European Union tries to make sure that all the languages are properly accommodated, and they do lots of translations, simultaneous translations in 25 languages and so on. Yeah. And they try. There are these models. Of course, it requires a lot of expense, and we can negotiate about the expense, But in principle, if we could state, that everybody's language is equally, because that's how they see themselves as part of, big and small, all of them. And I always say the tyranny of the three groups in the Ethiopian political discourse, the Tigray and the Amhara and the Oromo. And I think that's killing the country, actually. I think we need to die. The country is far, far bigger than that. Of course, there are large groups, but hey, there are many in number, the other peoples, and who have very strong, legitimate claim to just demands in that country. And they want to have a share, a visibility, and a stake in that country. And one of the ways to do it is through recognizing their language as co-equally federal working language. And then let's worry about practicalities. I know 80 languages, it's the Babel of, the Tower of Babel. I know people would say this, and my students used to say that. But it's a matter of principle. If this country is going to make peace with its history and its current situation, multinational situation, then that's the only way to go forward. That's the only way. It's a commitment, a principled commitment. And then we will deal with the practical issues. And sometimes they would practically choose to use Amharic and as they did, by the way, some of the regions now use Amharic as a working language instead of their own local languages because of their diversity, because of all sorts of issues, or because of practicality and so on. So let's not impose it, even the working language, and let's not close the door to 3, 4, 5 select languages and then close, say, the rest of you, good luck. That I don't think is a proper way of dealing with it. So it is dealt with, the issue of language, but not sufficiently. There are some demands that are coming up to show that more has to be done, and probably constitutional tinkering in this area would be legitimate. Then you have the issue of capital city, which hasn't been properly dealt with. I know practically people would just want to go on with what is there, and there will be no hush, no noise about it. But I think Ethiopia's leaders must show leadership by creating one national asset the country shares, which is the capital district, capital city, capital territory. And that would also get us out of the fixation around Finfinne, Addis Ababa. Then the constitutional issues are Article 8, the sovereignty of nations, which this National Dialogue Commission is going to remove. And Abiy Ahmed has so many times said it, and many people have said it, and they said because there is that clause in Ethiopia that has foreclosed the right of individuals to human rights and so on and so forth. No, that was basically a recognition of the collective agency of the other peoples, and a recognition of the fact that they constituted Ethiopia's sovereignty. Thus, Ethiopia's sovereignty is derived from their sovereignty, and their sovereignty is the ultimate sovereignty, and it cannot be overridden, even in emergency situations. It cannot be overridden by any constitutional amendment, and so on and so forth. It's a fundamental principle. It is not just a right, it is an organizing principle. I think that's right, that they got that one right, although they, I think, unwittingly mixed it up with the principle of democracy and popular sovereignty. And then sub-article 2 talks about representative democracy and direct democracy, which is a separate provision, really, because that's a form of practicing democracy, not about collective agency. Article 9 is about the supremacy of the constitution. That's fine. There is one thing they should be thinking about, which is about the place of treaty, the status of treaties in Ethiopia's legal system, because in Ethiopia's legal system, treaties are said to be part of the constitution, and we never know whether they are equal with the constitution or subordinate to the constitution. So we will never know whether international obligations are constitutional matters or sub-constitutional matters. Those must be clarified.
And what happens? And what happens when they contradict with the constitution?
Exactly, those are the issues. Contradiction normally is resolved through the hierarchy of laws. You see, the constitution is the supreme law of the land. Treaties are part of the constitution. That's what it says. So at least the human rights provisions of the international covenants and so on and so forth are part of the law. What it says, the treaties are part of the law of the land. Does it mean they are part of the constitution? Therefore, they are superior. And when there is a contradiction, you defer to them, or they are just part of the law of the land, equal to the parliamentary legislation, and when there is a contradiction between international law and the constitution, then the constitution prevails. Those are the kind of issues that technically we need to clarify. And, one provision about the exact status, at least of the international human rights provisions. Are they, having a supreme position with the constitution, or are they? Which means also, it also that will also indicate to us what kind of incorporation of treaties we should adopt. Meaning, do we transformative kind of incorporation or direct application? There are some countries which make treaties part of the law of the land at the moment of signing. There are some countries which want to transform the treaty into national legislation, meaning it becomes part of the law of the land only when it is enacted by the parliament and issued in the official legal gazette, the Nagarit Gazeta in Ethiopia, etc. So the status of treaties in the constitution will determine the mode of incorporation that the parliament follows later on, and the determination of the hierarchy, its hierarchy in the hierarchy of laws in the country. So that is one area that one has to think. Along with that, of course, there is an institutional issue that comes, which is the interpretation of the constitution, which has been a sticky point for a long time. The House of Federation is not the best of institutions to interpret the constitution. But I understand the logic, the political logic behind it. And yet, it's not even achieving that political logic within its own scheme. In my view, the House of Federation should only be, you can keep it there. One thing you can do is to make sure that the Constitutional Inquiry Council has absolute autonomy over the technical matters. And the House of Federation does not do technicalities, just votes on the proposal of the House of the Constitutional Inquiry Council. As it stands now, they go to the details. They talk about the technicalities, and that I don't think helps for jurisprudence of the rights of self-determination. The second thing is that the House of Federation is flawed because numerically it doesn't give equal representation to all nations. The votes are given, representatives of the different nations depend on the number of the population. So Oromia, if it is 20 million, will have 21 representatives. Tigray, if it is 6 million, it will have 7 representatives, and so on and so forth, which is not fair because it will not protect the minority nations when the danger of majoritarian tyranny happens, like it happened in the case of Tigray in 2020, when they removed the members from the House of Federation, purged the members of the executive, and voted on the war in the absence of the Tigrayan representatives in both houses. When they did this, they are the majority, but there was no vote to freeze the majority's genocidal thirst. That was a clear case. So for me, that's a very flawed institutional structure. One alternative is to have a constitutional court altogether. I don't trust our judiciary, because our judiciary is just a reflection of the politicians. And most of these noisemakers around here are lawyers. Most of the people who created an assault on democracy in 2020, advising Abiy to extend the election, who were lawyers, PhD holders, most of them, my students. I plead guilty on that count. So the Ethiopian legal intelligentsia has always been on the opportunistic and conservative side. It has never been on the progressive side. It has been part of the Red Terror. It has been part of the genocide. Their credential is bad, the Ethiopian legal professional, as it exists. We can have a dialogue on this another time. So the Constitutional Court is a better idea. Again, the crop of lawyers that go into that Constitutional Court also are from the same people, but at least we'll have a more serious scrutiny, a degree of detachment, a degree of depoliticizing of the judicial process. Probably, again, it depends on who is really overseeing this and implementing this. It requires a large than life personality in the shape of a leader in that country to do all this. We might need a Mandela, a Nehru kind of people, and I don't know if that is emerging anytime soon. So that's about the early parts. Article 10 is human rights. There is all sorts of defamation, I can say, going on about Ethiopia's constitution not recognizing individual rights, collective rights. No, Article 10 is very clear. Human rights are sacred. It's the principle of sanctity of human rights. And it also recognizes international human rights. It recognizes both collective and individual rights. And it says they shall be recognized, protected, and promoted. And that's where the idea of Human Rights Commission, Ombudsman Institution, etc., the institutional manifestation of that principle of the sanctity of human rights that gave birth to those institutions. Article 10 is about secularism. I don't think we need any improvement. It's the best thing that is done in the Constitution. Why? The state is secular. The state shall not interfere in religion. Religion that shall not. It's absolute distinction between the sacred and the secular in Ethiopia, which is far more wonderful than many of the advanced constitutions. The American Constitution has a disestablishment clause, meaning the federal government shall not establish or disestablish any religious, etc. What it was actually saying was it will not support Quakers as opposed to Baptists, etc. In the negotiation, that was not that they want to be away from God, because the Constitution talks about God, deity, and so on, the Declaration of Independence. Ours is very clear, and most of the constitutions of the world want to protect religion from the state. Ethiopia's constitution protects religion from the state, protects the state from religion. So is there any fear of fundamentalism? Then there you go, you have it, So that church or religion will not take over the government, and I know the Ethiopian Orthodox Church wants to be still the state church. I don't know if it works, and it might be, but the good thing, one of the best things that the Constitution got right is the freedom, the idea of religion, the principle of secularism, and then of course freedom of religion along with that in Article 27, 29, freedom of conscience, belief, practicing religion, teaching, manifesting, etc. groups individually, all that is very well done. There is nothing anyone can do to improve upon that. Article 12 is about transparency and accountability of government. It's a standard. There is nothing one can say about that. This is where the issue of the Auditor General, its institutional form is the Auditor General, Anti-Corruption Commission, and so on and so forth. So that is also very good principle of democracy. What we have then is the human rights chapter. Most of the human rights chapters are very elaborate, very clear. They only need to develop a jurisprudence, either in a constitutional court or in normal courts. Justiciability is an issue, human rights, to make human rights justiciable. But I think as it stands, if there is a very strong crop of legal professionals, that can be worked out, even as it stands. Some of the crudities are left as they are because of the underdevelopment of the legal profession in Ethiopia. And the delegitimization of human rights clauses in the constitution, because the constitution is written by the Wayyan. I have been teaching international human rights law, in constitutional human rights. I created an LLM program in the Addis Ababa University for constitutional law and public law in general, for criminal justice and criminal law, for international human rights law, and for public international law. And everyone was saying, do you take this Wayani constitution seriously? Had it not been Andreas Shete that was the president, that project wouldn't have succeeded. And thankfully, Andreas supported it. The politicians of the day supported it, and we have now an LLM program, master's programs in these areas. But I know the staff were resistant, and it was very hard to find teachers. So sometimes I used to teach in the human rights law program, in the constitutional law program, in the criminal justice program, and in public international law. And I have to beg some people from different offices to come and teach, because the staff within the law school did not want to teach it. Why? Because it's part of the Wayani project. So that was one of the things. I'm sorry, we can talk about these things in another time, maybe in another episode. But so, human rights chapter is amazing. A plethora of rights, about 31 types of rights, from individual rights to second generation rights, welfare rights, freedom rights, individual rights, rights that require the state to abstain, to do nothing but to take its hands off, freedom rights. Then you have welfare rights, the rights that require the state to do something, the right to health, the right to education, the right to housing, the right to environment. Wow. And not many people, many countries have the right to environment as part of their constitutional system, by the way. And whenever I present the Ethiopian constitution in the past, people say, whoa, this must be very modern. Well, we don't know how it came to be. But we have that, the welfareists, the more positive rights. And then we have the collective rights, the right to self-determination. We have the most progressive, the right to peace, the right to development. These are mostly recognized in international law. In Ethiopia, it is a domestic constitutional matter. The right to development, the right to peace, the right to collective self-determination, which is increasingly recognized as part of the right of indigenous peoples and so on and so forth, which is recognized in international law but not in many domestic constitutions, but in Ethiopia it is. So in fact, if you really closely look at that constitution, one of the things that it does is it accentuates and advances the human rights revolution, as Louis Henkin once called it. He said the 1990s were the age of rights. I mean, the post-war time was the age of human rights. And if there is anything that is emblematic of that kind of revolution, it was the Ethiopian constitution. Ironically, again, because people who hate the TPLF or EPRDF in general, they delegitimized the constitution, and therefore they threw the baby with the bathwater. And the attempt by the National Commission, by Abiy Ahmed, to revamp that constitution, now the National Dialogue Commission, through the National Commission, is a testament to that delegitimizing practice that went on for so long, for over 27 years, and finally found a champion in Abiy Ahmed, and it came up in this form. So that's chapter 3. And then what it got right is, of course, adopting the multinational federal setup. And what it didn't get right is the fact that while it's great that it recognized the collective agency, the sovereignty of the nations, nationalities, and peoples, it didn't leave many rights, many powers to them. Most of the significant powers are reserved to the federal government, and only very local matters that are left to the states. And they have little revenue power, taxing power, and most of the important taxing and revenue power, so economic power, is within the hands of the federal government. So that's kind of paradoxical because these are sovereign, constituent units, but they don't even have strong taxing power. That's, I think, partially because the country was seen as poor and there is nothing to talk about economic power really in 1991, and I understand that. But partly because, not so today, partly because, again, like the capital city, we inherited a government who does economics from the center, who looks the periphery as waiting to be extracted. The periphery is the tributary and the center is the one who decides revenues and expenses. That's the heritage, the imperial heritage. That, I think, is part of the reason, but I think that can be slightly tweaked. What else do we have? About the presidential system and the parliamentary system, now the National Commission is obsessed with, and Abiy Ahmed is obsessed with, changing this system into presidential system. I don't think mostly presidential systems fare well in fragmented societies. In Arendt Leichhardt, professor of political science from Yale, used to call this thing consociation. He in segmented societies, he says, where there are many ethnic groups and there is hardly anything that they will politically share, then what you can do is, because they can't share a president, what you can do is you have a parliamentary system with a proportional representation system where they also share the executive power, and that executive power sharing is called consociation. It is association with, in a way, literally consociation, but it's a technical term that he invented to describe this situation. And Ethiopia, I think, is fairly a segmented society. And for segmented societies, the best form of government is a parliamentary, not first post the past kind of electoral system, parliamentary with proportional representation, like Tigray had done in 2020 before the run-up to the election, which was ingenious, by the way, in Ethiopia. That never existed. It was quite an experiment that was quashed. And one of the regrets I have about Pretoria is that Tigray gave up that election, the legitimacy of their government, and agreed to have a transitional government in Tigray. If transitional government was necessary anywhere, it was at Arat Kilo, not in Tigray, because that was a legitimate government and it was a hard-earned democratic exercise that invited so much tragedy to that land. Anyway, Ethiopia, for a long time, prominent politicians like Merera Gudina has been calling for it, and because he studied it too. He studied this for his PhD in Holland. And Arendt Leichhardt was a Dutch political course, mostly taught in America. And this is mostly, if you see the proportional representation and parliamentary system of government, it's mostly in European parliaments, including Scandinavians. And that is what Professor Merera was calling for a long time. Abiy Ahmed wants to break that. He has his fantasy about American democracy, and he wants to make everything like America, and therefore he wants to have a presidential system. And the Americans, they whisper to him that you should do away with all these parties and you should only have two parties, one opposition, one democratic and Republican kind. So that's basically what he's aiming at, and that's where they're heading. And the National Dialogue Commission, one of the agenda items it has put forward is what Ethiopia wants, presidential or parliamentary system. One other thing I forgot with regard to human rights is the right to land. Now, the right to land was one of the things that the Constitution got right, but it was inherited from the Derg time. The right to land actually destroyed the feudal-bourgeois system. The right to land destroyed the class system. In Ethiopia today, we have no class division. It is a truly post-class or classless society. Why? The key means of production in that country is land. Land is owned not by any capitalist, not by any feudal, but by the state, not even by the farmers, in whose name the revolution was conducted, mind you. It is in the hands of the state. And second, the second means of production that you would use is capital, which comes from the banks. And yes, there are private banks. Yes, there is a liberalization ongoing, but the banks as they stand now are not the maker and breakers of capital. Again, the government, the central bank and the commercial bank of Ethiopia are the dominant banks. Capital is from them. Any investor, any wannabe rich person, even foreign investors, they rely on the government for land, they rely on the government for loan, and the other resource, their input, is labor. Labor is not under the sovereignty of the capitalist or industrialist as such. There is a federal trade union, and the trade union is subservient to the government, just like most of the institutions. So the trade union and the employment law, the labor law of the country, though Abiy Ahmed tweaked it in favor of more employers now, is a socialist law. It was a law that was proclaimed in 1975 alongside the Land to the Tiller proclamation. It's a very dynamic law. It collectivizes trade union action and so on and so forth. So employers and capitalists don't have a strong power. So in Ethiopia today, there are no classes. There is no rich class as such. There is a state-dependent kind of charlatans who go around and amass money based on the land the government gives them and loan the government permits for them to borrow. That's all there is. And it's in this system that some people say, Abiy included, and my own friend Jawar talks about putting the accent on class divisions, not just ethnic divisions, because those are cross-cutting. I said, what classes are we talking about? Abiy wants us to create classes by giving land, by privatizing land, and this is what the National Commission wants to do. And Jawar says, there is class struggle and we have to deal with that, not ethnic divisions. I said, what class struggle is there in that country? Who owns the land? The government. Who owns the banks? The government. Who owns the trade unions? The government. So where is the industrial class? Where is the capitalist in Ethiopia? Nowhere to be seen. And remember, this was a developmentalist state at some point. And people do not have economic literacy to tell us about class revolution to be conducted in Ethiopia. There is no such. I understand intersectionality and so on, poverty, etc., etc. Poverty, gender, ethnic marginality, they come together to hit hard on some populations. Yes, to talk about empowering those populations who are hard hit by a confluence, a convergence of different kinds of disadvantage is different from talking about ending the class wars in that country. And ironically, while the ones that talk about class wars outside the government is actually trying to create class by returning the major means of production, land and capital, to private citizens. And there is some connection with the de-ethnicizing urge as well. The de-ethnicizing urge is also impacting on the privatization of land desire. The reason is, by privatizing land, you take land away from the ethnic groups to individuals, to capitalists, and then the ethnic groups will migrate to cities. And once they go to the cities, they don't have any contiguous territory that they can claim on a nationalist basis. That's the idea. And I have been a witness to this kind of thinking in 2000, when we had a new urban planning master's program in the Ethiopian Civil Service College. A newly minted PhD from France just arrived, and he was talking about the fact that in 20 years, these regions, ethnicity, etc., will be irrelevant, because if the migration is urbanward, we create more cities, and the more cities are created, then the more people move into the urban areas, then they leave their ethnic homelands, and therefore the homelands become useless as a rallying point, as a mobilization tool. That was a very sinister game, and it was in the backyard of EPRDF, the Civil Service College, that this guy is talking about. I said, wait a moment. This is a country which has said ethnic groups are indivisible. Ethiopia is a destructible union composed of indestructible units, not like other countries. Spain, France, the republic is indivisible. You cannot separate, and that's why the Barcelonistas, the what is it called? The area that Barcelona exists in. What is it called? The
Catalonia.
region? The Catalonia. When they had referendum, they were harassed, persecuted, and they left. And the referendum was outlawed
I think
because
their top political leaders are still jailed in Belgium or something like,
in jail.
or not jail, but
Yes.
in exile, I think.
Yeah. In
Which is something
exile and
strange
in
because it's not the kind of stuff you expect to happen in Europe.
Absolutely. The reason is the republic, it says in the constitution, is indivisible. The French constitution says it, probably the Italian constitution, because La République is the embodiment of reason, enlightenment reason after Robespierre. It is indivisible. Not so in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Republic is a destructible union, because there is a right to self-determination, composed of indestructible units, because the original sovereigns are the constitutive units. And I don't think people have had their head around this. Maybe it's my lawyerly bias. And because this is the case, when you come up with an architect who is dean of the urban planning program, who says to you, we can re-engineer Ethiopia into different cities and make ethnic allegiances non-existent in 20 years' time, I said, do you understand where you're standing? Do you understand the political? And this is a civil service college. And I just joked with him, and I left civil service college very soon after that. I went to the Addis Ababa University. And of course, that was a developmental state. They were busy in creating many cities. And I remember the first time we graduated about 900 urban planners. The first time. 900 urban planners. There was a cocktail at the graduation, after the graduation, and Andreas, because he was also a board member, a board chair at some point of Civil Service College, he was there. I remember Arkaba was the mayor of his city of Addis Ababa, and Andreas was here, and we came here, and his Arkaba and Abbas, they were so fascinated. So many urban planners now, and Andreas just jokingly said, well, what do these people do? It is a one city country anyway. And they didn't know how to respond. Andreas is very unassuming, very humble, and he just said, well, 900 and some planners. And the people were thinking of having mayors. They were coming up with this new idea of running all the towns with mayors rather than, in the past, it's like the district capital city is part of the district. So the district chief is also the leader of the city, the district town. But now there is going to be a city mayor and then the district leader. So they were producing these urban planners for that task. And they were so fascinated. And Andreas, he had this, at that time he was a little sick and his voice wasn't audible much. And this frail man, I remember, he said, why do you need all these people? And he said, it's one city country anyway. And I was laughing, Nobody knew what to say. And in his very unassuming way, he wanted to bring them back to the discussion to explain what he meant. And I got what he said. I didn't like it, but I really admired him. And then, of course, things unfolded. And by the way, most of the people, the Opidio people who are in power today, most of the people who run the Sugar City and all the flashy things that are going on, had their masters during that time from that urban planning college, including people like Takale Umar. And a number of other people I can name were part of that generation of urban planners that went into becoming mayors, including Adani Chavivi and all the people. Anyway, why am I talking so much about this land issue? How the land issue, privatization of land, is tied to de-ethnicization, the de-ethnicizing urge, and the privatization of land. They go along with each other to create a new dispensation in which the new Ethiopian, the new man as such, the new ethnicity-less man is to be born and to be, released into the public life of Ethiopia. That's part of the project of this thing. One of the things that the Constitution got right was the collectivization of land, maintaining the collectivization project of the Derg Times. And I'm sure any credible economic policy in that country for the coming 20 years, 30 years, probably 50 years, will be a state capitalist or a developmentalist state, willy-nilly, whether he's Abiy Ahmed or whether he has an ideologically illiterate or ideologically empty, vacuous, or a person who has subscribed to the new liberal paradigm. In Ethiopia, they can only do with a state capitalist model of development or a developmental state model. And I don't think our politicians generally educate themselves in the economic area. And when you have 140 million people, 70% of which a young population, and as far as Oromia is concerned, only 3% of the young population under 20 goes to high school. High school enrollment is 3% after Branu Naga came to power. And this is so shocking. What does that mean for the labor market of Ethiopia? What does that mean for us to want to continue the developmental state model, where we need so many technical people to lead the industrialization and so on and so forth? We have 3% high school enrollment. That should be something that will lead us to a very urgent education campaign, to be honest. Nobody is speaking about it. And I was asked recently to brief a group of Oromo lawyers or Oromo politicians who want to see the future. It's one thing to slogan here, to do the slogans of Olabumma Bilisumma, freedom, but it's another to foresee what is to come. In that briefing, research in the process, researching towards that briefing, realized all these statistics about the population, resources, the way things are. And so I had to project it between 2026 and 2055. We were dictated to move it to 2055, for example, some semblance of proper development because of the young population, which has to be educated, become part of the labor force, and transform the economic system. It's a huge task, man. It is an eye-opener for me, but this is one of the things that people are blind to. So the Constitution actually got it right in the fact that it reiterated the collectivized mode of land ownership. It can be tweaked. It says the land belongs to the state and the nation's nationalities inhabiting on it. It hasn't sorted out how exactly nations and nationalities own the land. That has to be sorted out. Are we talking about community ownership? Between individual ownership and state ownership, there is community ownership. And of course, in pastoralist areas, that makes sense because they don't know individual ownership anyway. One of the problems by Tsegaye and Arkaba experienced during that time when they wanted to have cities and, as development hubs, that's what they wanted the cities for. And when they were thinking of that, one of the problems they had was land registration issues in Somali region, in Afar region, in the peripheral regions of the West. These pastoralist populations don't have a definite land which they own, but they know exactly to whom it belongs, whose child, whose grandson is entitled to it, but there is no map, no cadastre, nothing. And it was a difficult thing. And they didn't care. The Somali pastoralists, the Oromo pastoralists, the Afar, they didn't care whether the state acknowledged it or not. They know. They know whose land which is. They never cared. They know how community mediates and negotiates hard times, drought times, famine times between tribes, and how they come back to own a particular area for that particular group. And it was a frontal collision between modernity and tradition. And one thing the EPRDF regime got right about pastoralists, and by the way, the constitution recognized the right of pastoralists, the rights of Ethiopian farmers constitutionally, which is unusual in many countries. And this is the constitution that's blamed for not recognizing human rights, individual rights. And one of the things they got right was also to create this idea of mobile schools. The state has a duty to provide education and health, reducing mortality rate, child mortality rate, and maternal mortality rate, because it's part of the Millennium Development Goals back then. And one of the great performances of Ethiopia's regime at the time was the achievement of development millennium goals, the Millennial Development Goals, which is now changed. I think the name has changed. And in order to do that, one of the things they did is they took the clinics to the areas, but school was tricky. So they had to come up with mobile schools. I have witnessed in my own eyes in Dolobai and Dolo Ado districts of Somali region, one in Liban zone, one in Afdar zone. And it was amazing how it works, the mobile schools, seasonal schools. They go with the pastoralists. They teach the kids, they examine the kids, and they go back to the towns. And the pastoralists move on. When they come next round, They go back to the kids. They teach them. They give them materials. They examine them. They move on. I was like, how do you keep track of this? This is very difficult. But the attempt itself was remarkable to me, to be honest. It was remarkable. I don't know what, because particularly Dolobai Warada, if you know it, it is a God-forsaken territory. If I were to write a book about it, that's what I would say. It is trapped between Gennale and, okay, there is Dawa and Gennale. They meet and they become Juba. But these ones are trapped between Gennale and Web. They are so close to Dolo Ado, which is the border town. But because of the river, they can't cross it to that town, which is the last hub of modernity because of military presence, border town area. And then they are far out away from Afder zone, Argele town, about 400 kilometers. So it is a no man's land, literally. The disease, the illiteracy, the domestic violence, the epidemic, the famine, the drought that torments that area it's a desert place. It's very sad. And I have worked as a UNDP with different consultants, academics over the years. Everyone who has seen that place today, 20 years later, from America, what has happened to that place, to those people? Everyone asks. And I don't know who has penetrated that area with innovations like the mobile schools. And those are the things that the Constitution got right. And these are not easy things. These are not simple things. You can't just brush them aside. And I have no particular love for TPLF or EPRDF region. I was a persecutee. I was persecuted by EPRDF, including by the people who are in power today, because I'm an Oromo. Doing security clearance of an Oromo suspect is the responsibility of the Oromo security chief, the Oromia security chief. I was hunted by these people, and I have no particular praise for them. I have no interest in that. But the things that the Constitution unleashed, the promises it made, and the awakening it created is what is part of the agony and ecstasy, as it were, of Ethiopia today. And this is what Abiy's dispensation wants to undo, and the National Dialogue Commission is becoming an institutional manifestation of. Sorry, I ranted.
No, I mean you make a distinction between the people and the constitution, which is to your credit. And as you know, a lot of people find it difficult to disentangle the two, which implies that if they don't like the people, they also project that to disliking the constitution, although in principle they have nothing against the text of the constitution. But thank you for taking us through both the spirit and the text of the Constitution. You've given us a lot of food for thought. I think knowledge, as I always say on this channel, is the foundation for everything else. Knowing what the Constitution is, why it was written in the way it was, why the provisions and the articles exist, what were they meant to address, and all that. I think knowing that is foundational before talking about improvement or changing or amendment and all that, so that you have given us that knowledge. Of course, you touched on a lot of issues that maybe warrant separate treatment, and maybe we'll return to some of those issues another time. But as a departing thought, also because I would want us to talk about Addis Ababa just as we began with Addis Ababa, it seems to me that there are two challenges in relation to Addis Ababa. One is addressing the legitimate misgivings and grievances of the Oromos and providing a semblance of redress as well. And the second is giving guarantees to its residents that it would remain their city, that they would be in charge of the city through a democratic process, that they wouldn't be discriminated against regardless of what administrative structure is invented. And where is the soft spot? It seems to me that is really what the whole problem boils down to. And with that, we will end.
Yes, it's simple. Addressing the grievances of the people who were disadvantaged historically and assuaging the fear and anxiety of the people who are living there is the routine responsibility, normal responsibility of any elected political office holder. I don't think it should be that difficult. This is what is meant by leadership. This is what is meant by statesmanship. One remembers the past and fears that his historic grievances are brushed aside, or even worse, treated as fabrications of a particular time, not real. That's the fear. And the other fears that because we have to address that, then I'm going to lose. A, I'm going to be pushed out. B, I'm going to be a second-rate citizen. C, my rights are going to be undermined, etc. I do not think we can go past addressing the grievances. I don't think addressing the grievances is that difficult because they only require a political gesture of recognition, of token reparation, perhaps, in terms of redress. Token reparation means $1 a year as a tax, because it is more
So
about
because it's
recognition and
for symbolic importance.
symbolic, exactly, token kind of reparation and recognition of bringing back some of the cultures, probably including recognition of the language in the city. Now, there is some fear among many people. I remember a Swedish Ethiopian woman in 2017 when Abiy was just, and later she became a great fan of Abiy Ahmed. But when he was about to be inaugurated, just before that, she was telling a friend of mine in Sweden, saying, "Can you imagine? These people are winning, and our children are going to study in Afan Oromo. What a catastrophe!" I said, number one, who will force your children to be
Well, wasn't
educated?
that some sort of panic when some rumors spread around that schools in Addis Ababa were forced to make their students sing national anthems in Oromifa? There was some sort of panic, I remember, some sort of paranoia 2 or 3 years ago. So it chimes in with what you're saying, the sense of panic every time Oromo is mentioned in connection with Addis Ababa and in connection with political power.
Yes,
And when Abiy came to power, the fact that he still is, as far as we know, Oromo, was seen with a degree of cynicism at the very least.
yes. That fear was, I think, propagated more than it did, more than um, the level at which it should have been propagated. And first and foremost, making Afan Oromo medium of instruction was not anywhere on the agenda. That's number one. Secondly, the one thing that was demanded was for Oromo residents to have schools where their children can study in Afan Oromo. And there were some 3 or 4 Afan Oromo speaking schools that were created, and I don't think they continued to operate. And it was in these schools that the national anthem, the regional anthem, was supposed to be sung every morning in the assembly, school assembly. And people said, "We want." Now, I don't think anyone would force a child to sing a song. Well, if you go to that school first, like you go to any school, you take the rules and regulations of that school. But if you do not want to sing this, you just have to tell the people and say, "I don't want to sing this." I don't think there was this heavy-handed pressure for anyone to sing it. I don't think even in Oromia people force people to sing it, to sing the anthem. But anyway, it is in these few number of schools that fear was sprayed, and people became, they just went crazy about it. And I think there is a lot of fear mongering than what is actually transpiring on the ground. What I think should be done is address the grievances. Let Oromos have schools where their children can be studying in Afan Oromo. And don't force it upon anybody. If anyone wants to learn, that's fine. If they don't want to, that's fine too. Simple. The point is inclusion, isn't it? To allow those who feel disadvantaged to have the opportunity to get public service in their own language. Simple as that. You allow them. That shouldn't be imposed on others. And I think this is a very easy thing to do. In terms of addressing historical grievances, I said some token reparations, atonement, probably one national acknowledgement or ceremonial acknowledgement statements, like it exists in here in Canada, in different other places, at least in big public ceremonies. And that's as much about it. Now, the major task is how we can assuage the anxieties and fears of the resident population. That is the one, because it is unduly blown out of proportion and people are in very fear mode. And that's not good. I don't think we should exploit the vulnerable situation of this population. to make them part of the fodder of our political arsenal. That's what's happening, actually. And their rights should be respected. I don't think their rights have properly been respected because of the lack of the democratic deficit anyway. But that should be, we should advance the horizons of freedom in those areas. People should continue to live their lives. There can never be forced departure from the city, because everyone has the right to move anywhere and live anywhere according to the constitution of Ethiopia. And that shouldn't be undermined in anywhere, let alone in the capital city. And they are very close to media outlets nowadays. You can't do that in Finfinne, to be honest, as a government. And I think legitimate fears have to be addressed, and it is easy to do that. Number one, don't weaponize them as part of your political calculation to undo the federal system and to push away Oromos from the city, to deny recognition to Oromo grievances around the city. So people are doing scaremongering in order to mobilize and deploy this population for their own political advantage. Most of it is basically about how to mobilize the city population against Abiy Ahmed, to be honest. It's not about serving them. And it's capitalizing and exploiting the Oromophobic attitude, the regnant, sedimented prejudice in the city, and the kind of bringing it up and mobilize the people against the regime. Active citizenship is important. I am one of those who say why the people of the city are not acting against the regime for a long time. And in fact, that's the population, one of the areas of the Ethiopian population that was complicit in the genocide that was going on for many years, because most of the hate speech was fomented by the artists, by politicians, by religious leaders from that city, in the halls of that city. And I was always critical of that population's civic disengagement for a long time. And I think that population should be mobilized properly for political action, but for legitimate political action. But now some of the politicians are trying to use them to throw dirt against Abiy Ahmed. And most of the anxiety and fear is baseless. No one wanted them to leave that city. Look, anyone who owns a city would want many people to come and live in their city because they benefit from it. Nobody wants anyone to leave. No city mayor wants anyone to leave. They want more people to come, but they worry more about how to extend rights and facilities and amenities to all the residents of the city. And nobody should be intimidated to leave, number one. I know people are reading a lot into the whatever projects, corridor projects, whatever Abiy uses to, displace some people. They read that into this talk about Finfinne being an Oromo city, So Abiy is an Oromo. The Oromos are demanding these grievances to be addressed, and part of doing it is, so it's a conspiracy theory mainly. They are doing these projects in order to supplant us, to change the demography, all right? And it's as if this is not enough. We already have grievance about that. And now people like Tsegaye are coming back out and saying this city should be exclusively to the Oromo. Well, nobody said it is exclusive to Oromo. Oromo has a right over the city, a right to that city. It's geographical, it's historical, it's legal, it's experiential fact. Why do we fail to acknowledge this? Why do we, in our blindness, assume that this city is purified, sanitized, so to say, by removing Oromo out of it? That is a hate speech. That is a dress rehearsal for genocide. That is what we are saying. But this does not mean because we have this demand, anybody should feel intimidated enough to depart, one. Two, should be undermined in any form or shape, because there is a fundamental right of every citizen, should relinquish any of his or her rights in that city, collective as well as individual. This is not to impose Oromo language upon the residents. If they so choose, they will study. If they don't, no problem. If the Afan Oromo becomes an equal working language, then it doesn't mean they are not going to be, Amharic is going to disappear. There will always be Amharic. In fact, most of the Oromos would prefer to use Amharic. All right? And if there are Oromo folks who want to get service in Afan Oromo, then that will be available. That's all that is said. Now, my problem and my trenchant criticism is always, how is it in this day and age you rail against a measure that tries to advance the horizons of freedom for some people, even when yours is not affected. You might not like it, you might not want to use it, it's maybe superfluous to you, but it means something to some people. They want to get education in Afan Oromo, their business. Why are you foreclosing this opportunity to be inclusive by harping on a fear and anxiety that is actually with no basis? That is my question. And all of this, the fear and anxiety of diminished rights on the part of the residents, and the fear and anxiety of grievances left unaddressed and being totally to be excluded from the city, all this can easily be solved by a leadership that pays attention to all of the demands. The problem we have today is a crisis in leadership. A crisis in leadership at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. And in the absence of this leadership, social media fills the vacuum. Activists fill the vacuum. Those who have privileged status, cultural, political, academic, whatever status, and therefore have a stronger voice, will dominate the platform. And where are the leaders? We haven't heard anything from them. Why aren't they speaking about these things? Why aren't they making statements about these things? Why aren't they coming out to placate the people? Instead, they are hiding behind. And in fact, they are counting on just as much as the opposition against the Oromo interests are trying to weaponize the city residents' fear. The government is waiting to weaponize the Oromo grievance against them. And they are all playing a tactical game of how we can use this population as a fodder against one another. And that is symptomatic of the deeper leadership problem, the deeper malaise the country has. Culturally, though, as a country, the issue of Finfinne, Addis Ababa, is symptomatic of a larger issue, a deeper pathology that empire has, which is how do we pay attention to the others of the Ethiopian state? The only way of dealing with the others of the state in Ethiopia is extermination. That's the usual tradition. I don't like TPLF, so I have to destroy them. Does it take to destroy the entire Tigrayan people? Yes, go ahead and do it. I don't like OLF. What shall I do? Destroy them. Does it take to inflict unspeakable atrocities on the Oromo nation? Yes, whatever it takes. So that is the fundamental problem. Ethiopia still hasn't developed a language, a grammar, a technology with which to deal with its others. And it wants them to be others, and it wants the others to be very far away. Unfortunately, at least as far as Oromia goes, it is right here and right now. They are right at the center, and they are not far away. And in Ethiopia's political imaginary, they are far away. Yedaragar, that's how it was preached. It was always the city is a metropole, and these are the barbarians who sometimes come to the city, and we look at them as exotic. But now they want to be ruled. They want to lord it over us. That we are not going to accept this. No way. Once you get into this emotional territory, there is no political solution for it. So what one has to do is now a leadership that has to come out and soothe everybody, calm them down, and face the deeper malaise, the fear of Ethiopia to face and deal with its others, or to outgrow its imperial fantasy that we are, one particular kind of people and others do not exist. That imperial fantasy is what is creating all these ghosts in our heads that evoke lots of fear in us. Deal with the fantasy, then the ghosts will go.
Deal with the fantasy, then the ghosts will go. I think that's a good way to finish, Tsegaye. Thank you very much. I think we have covered as much stuff as is possible in one recording, in one episode. But even then, it's obvious for our viewers to see that there is a lot of stuff that we could have gone into in more detail. But that is maybe something that we will do another time, Tsegaye. Also, thank you for the fight that you have been doing for the right causes, for people's rights. Since I knew you, earlier you mentioned our time at the University of Trento in Italy. I think that would have been in 2011, 2012. I was then politically naive. I have delayed.
I was in Trento the last time in 2010.
Yes, yeah.
July 2010 was the last time. I never
Yeah.
went back
I think
after that.
I arrived there when you were about to leave. I met you briefly,
So,
but
did we?
yeah, 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 yeah. The
Wow.
you had,
Okay.
I mean, I was an absolute nobody, but we had such a recognition that we wouldn't remember. I know. But yeah, but you have been standing up for people's rights since I knew you from back then. So that is 15 years, 16 years ago. Thank you for that. And another interesting point that you mentioned earlier, Tsegaye, is in relation to the Ethiopian elite. You say that they always somehow conspire to find themselves on the wrong side. And including cheering on for genocide. And even now, the genocidal machine is being oiled in Addis Ababa. You don't see any
Yes.
sustained, meaningful opposition from the Ethiopian elite. And I think it's about time that people look themselves in the mirror and ask some basic questions. Why is it that we are allowing this to be unleashed on our people, whether that is the Oromos or the Amharas or the Tigrans? And people should stand up and challenge the regime, take some sort of inspiration from people like you as well. But thank you very much. And until we see next time, goodbye to our viewers as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Taklai. You have been very generous with your time and with your words. Thank you.
That was my pleasure.